Hey there, it's Wayfair here, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app, when you spot it, a brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's Room of Choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
What I do know is that following my mother's death from an illness that robbed her of her memories and physical functions, I would learn just how much the woman entrusted to care for our mother had stolen from her, how much others mother trusted were either complicit in Esmerelda's schemes or manipulated by her to participate unknowingly in her con. The weeks, months, and years following my mother's death would open up a Pandora's box of deceit that had been hidden under our noses the entire time. From The Caregiver's Game by Charles E. Wallace, Jr. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. I am back from CrimeCon 2026 in Las Vegas. It was remarkable seeing all of you. Our meetup was beyond my wildest dreams. Listen, I will be speaking all about this in detail tomorrow night on my Patreon Zoom, and I invite you to participate. And I have photos as well. Just know how much I appreciate you. And I do not want to do this without you. Your support, your affection, your friendship, it means everything to me. Now, remember the Aphrodite Jones, Michael Kors bag book review raffle that we were doing. Well, there is a winner. Vicky won. I am so happy for her. She is a devoted murder bookie and a true crime lover. And I think she's read all of Aphrodite Jones's books. And I was able to give her the Michael Kors bag at CrimeCon in person. But more about that tomorrow. Just what a wonderful gathering of the clan is CrimeCon. The advocacy, the healing, the search for justice that really never ends. It warms my heart. It truly does. So back to the incredibly important The Caregiver's Game, Unraveling Financial Deceit in the Shadows of Dementia by Charles E. Wallace, Jr. This is episode 168, part 2. They didn't know what they didn't know, which is definitely foreshadowing. Be sure to listen to part 1, episode 166, before moving into this episode, and then the conclusion will be out shortly. I also have an interview with Chip Wallace that is coming because I had so many questions for him. Now, our brief recap. In part 1, we briefly met Joell Fleming, a 78-year-old mother of Charles, known to everybody as Chip, Wendy, and Eric. They all live in different parts of the country. Joell has spent her life in Dallas, where she has always lived in wealth and enjoyed culture, always appearing immaculate in her pearls and beautiful jewelry, with her debutante portrait gracing her living room. Joell is a serial marrier and has lived in her 2,300 square foot Athena condo, which her parents purchased back in the 1960s. Joell is a strong believer in legacy and generational wealth. Charitable contributions? Nah, never been a high priority for her. And while she can be difficult and more focused on herself than her children, they love her dearly and want what is best for her. However, they do not fully understand the implications of dementia. Well, to assist her, Joell hires Esmarelda Gomez as her caregiver, and she has longtime CPA Larry, her fiduciary Mo, and attorney Curly managing her financial affairs. But Esmeralda Gomez is raising red flags with Chip as he just feels that something is just not right. He shares his concern with family, who basically deem him a conspiracy theorist because he really doesn't have any proof, just this gut feeling. You know how I feel about gut feelings. Well, nevertheless, Chip and Wendy have their mother's medical power of attorney, their MPOA, so they expect no issues. But they are gravely mistaken when the MPOA is abruptly revoked. Now, Joell Fleming has always been secretive and shared little information with her children when they did have the MPOA. Now she's going to share much less. And then a suspicious flood causes Joell to move from her beloved Athena condo to Turtle Creek Apartments. Amplified by the COVID lockdown, that prevents her children from traveling to visit their mother for months upon months. Lockdown. Joell told Chip that the building manager wasn't allowing anyone in the hallways unless they were tossing out trash. While utterly beside himself, Chip desperately wanted to see her in person, but it just wasn't permitted. Since February, every time he called, Esmerelda answered and passed the phone to Joell. He felt stuck, especially since the airline had only given him a flight credit, and his mother was isolated at Turtle Creek Apartments with no family or friends nearby, only Esmerelda to keep her company. The thought of Joell's children visiting was met with continued negativity, constantly repeating, "There's COVID present on her floor. You can't come." Chip did learn that Joell had started physical therapy, which was a relief. However, actual conversations with his mother became increasingly scarce. When they did speak, Chip often had to repeat himself as mother struggled to understand. And he could hear Esmeralda prompting her in the background. But he had no insight into mother's condition, not without the medical power of attorney. In April 2020, Joell texted, with all suspecting that this was likely Esmeralda, explaining she didn't feel like talking and wasn't answering the phone. So Chip realized that Esmeralda was writing his mother's replies and probably had been for some time. But were those even his mother's words? Was that her sentiment? Was that what she really wanted to say? Regardless, they were stuck in lockdown and had to wait it out. Over the months, calls with Joell became less and less frequent. In June 2021, once again, Wendy called with surprising news. Mother was now in an assisted living facility, which shocked Chip. She had been completely opposed to this, and this was not a memory care facility. It was just a one-bedroom apartment. But Chip sought that silver lining. Perhaps they would be rid of Esmeralda and her hanger-oners. But no, Wendy said that Mother planned to keep employing them. But wait, why didn't they know this ahead of time? Why was everything happening behind their backs? One of them needed to get down there and see what was going on. Well, Wendy had time in early August, but Chip was swamped. Frustratingly, did it actually matter when they got there? Quote, "We weren't in charge of the decisions Mother made. She made it perfectly clear that that role no longer fell to us. We also couldn't drop everything at a moment's notice every time some new development came to light. I often felt bad about not being so readily available, but I knew we weren't the only family facing this type of situation. As much as I distrusted Esmeralda, I felt I had no choice but to let her handle things." Unquote. Remember, this is all during lockdown anyway. So before Wendy's August trip, Mother did call Chip a few times. While he asked about her life at the new facility, nearer to the Athena condo, which was an improvement, he didn't answer clearly got confused and her voice was weak. She had also found a buyer for her condo, and after the flood repairs were completed, she also had found a buyer for her condo. The flood repairs had been completed, and the condo in the Athena had been listed for over a year, but had received little interest. Well, to find out more, Chip visited Realtor.com. The condo had sold for $25,000 less than the asking price, but he was intrigued by the photographs showing digitally added modern furniture. He wondered where their mother's furniture had gone, but he was distracted by Wendy's concern about mother's health. She had aged significantly, was extremely thin, and needed a walker. Wendy had taken her to an art class that she really enjoyed, and Wendy asked Esmerelda why she wasn't arranging similar activities for Joell since she was in charge of her care. Quote, "We can't make her do any of these classes if she doesn't want to," unquote. Well, that didn't make Wendy feel any better, and she told Esmerelda to try harder. In December 2021, it was Brother Eric's turn to visit Mother. He told Chip that she was painfully thin. Her voice was very low. She was in hospice care and had only 3 or 4 months left to live. Understanding this was serious, Chip visited a few weeks later in January. Upon arriving at the facility, he followed COVID protocols and was accompanied by staff to the 6th floor. At his mother's door, he heard a TV blaring a violent movie. Entering in the sitting area, he saw a sofa and a coffee table with his mother in a recliner. Next to her was a plastic shelf that held a TV and wireless router, and the room opened to a basic kitchen. A caregiver, whom Chip had never seen before, was on the far side of the sofa. How long has she been sitting there, he asked himself. Some of his mother's furniture from the Athena condo were visible, but the room felt dark and kitschy, clearly decorated by Esmerelda. His mother's prized portrait of her as a young debutante hung on the wall, draped with Christmas lights that made it look tacky. And his mother didn't notice him at first. Kneeling in front of her, he said, "Hi," and she smiled and returned to watching TV. Chip then asked the caregiver about her usual day. She would wake up at 8 a.m. With help, she would get bathed and dressed. Breakfast was usually finished by 9:30 a.m., and dinner was served at 5:30 p.m. This was followed by TV until 7 p.m. By 8 p.m., she was ready for bed, and Chip's heart broke at the thought of her spending 12 hours a day in the recliner and the rest in bed. Now he showed her photos of her granddaughters and their new house. He had invited Mother and Esmerelda to visit when they bought it, but Mother had refused, finding the airport too challenging. And now she wasn't very interested in his pictures, so he picked up an old photo album and flipped through it. He spotted a photo of her and Dan on a European cruise in 2000, and she enjoyed this trip down memory lane. Just then, Esmerelda burst in, wearing 2 surgical masks and carrying a grocery bag. She said, quote, "You're not wearing a mask? I've tested positive at least twice," end quote. Well, he turned back to the albums as a few loose photos slipped out, old pictures of him and Wendy as kids. He recalled that they had once been in a green leather binder with plastic pockets. Well, where was that album now? Quote, looking around, he wondered where the boxes of albums and school yearbooks were in this small place. He asked, "Esmerelda, where are Mother's things?" "Oh, your mother had us get rid of everything," she said dismissively. "Everything? That's impossible." I couldn't fathom that. No way had Mother gotten rid of everything, especially the old photo boxes. Throwing away pictures of when she was young? Esmerelda had to be exaggerating. The thought was so absurd, it was almost comical. But the empty space in the apartment told me perhaps it wasn't. Someone had certainly gotten rid of most of Mother's belongings. I couldn't believe it. "Are you sure it's all gone?" Yes, you can call Larry and ask him, end quote. Chip wanted to confront Esmerelda, but she clammed up and slipped away. Instead, he decided to investigate on his own. After she left for the day, he video phoned Wendy, and they opened their mother's jewelry box in her bedroom, finding only old trinkets and fake jewelry, none of the valuable pieces. He wondered if all the good stuff was at the bank, and at this point in reading, I knew that was wishful thinking. Something was off. Mother's dementia had worsened, but he and Wendy could not understand why she was giving away her possessions, which she valued more than her relationships. Esmerelda wasn't revealing the whole story, and he feared confronting her would only rock the boat and make things worse. And he still does not fully grasp the situation. Mother was dying, a truth Chip refused to face. She barely ate or drank and was very frail. The reality remained he lived several states away. He believed it was better to keep the peace, unaware that Joell Fleming only had 6 weeks left to live. March 8, 2022, Joell Fleming passed away. No family was present, only Esmerelda. She had not informed Chip or Wendy. It was Larry who notified Wendy. Their mother's death brought no closure or relief that her pain was over. Quote, "It only opened the door to a deeper tragedy, a paper trail of stolen money, a shattered estate, and the chilling realization that the person in charge of her care had taken her for a ride," end quote. The cascading shock began with the discovery of a new will, allegedly created by Mother on January 24th, 2020, although her signature was an indecipherable scribble. But wait, she had dementia. Was she even capable of executing a new will? Well, before that question was even spoken aloud, Chip learned that in this will, Mother left Esmerelda $300,000. What the hell? This was very unlike his mother. Back in January 2020, his mother had texted Chip and Wendy telling them not to visit her, even though their flights had already been purchased, and then COVID kicked in. What they didn't realize is by this point, their mother's cognitive abilities had seriously eroded. But still, they all wondered how she could have been in the right state of mind to make any changes. Larry, Joell's longtime CPA, also revealed that Esmerelda was the beneficiary of a $250,000 annuity, along with other surprising financial arrangements. Turns out that in December 2019, Joell, in air quotes, traded her low-mileage 2001 silver Lexus for a brand new red Lexus, a decision neither Chip nor Wendy was told about. Their mother's old car had worked perfectly, so it seemed unnecessary for a woman in her late 70s to have two cars since she stopped driving in 2017. She had begun getting lost in previously familiar neighborhoods, which made this purchase more puzzling as suspicions grew. And Esmerelda loved the new Lexus, and she used it regularly. One had to ask if Joell even knew that she had bought it. In 2018, when Esmerelda began working for Joell, she was driving their mother's 2001 Lexus to run errands and take her to the doctor's appointments. Eventually, Joell allowed Esmerelda to take the car home and added her to Joell's car insurance. In these early days, this had struck Chip as wrong. Esmerelda was still a stranger, and he always had that nagging feeling that she was taking advantage of his mother, but he had no proof. On the other hand, he was grateful for Esmerelda's help since he and his siblings lived far away. At the time during this conversation, Joell had shared with Chip that she had gone on a road trip, leaving him stunned. Wait, how could his mother, who was having trouble using a fork, have driven all the way to Oklahoma to visit a casino? However, Joell giggled like a girl on a new adventure, and Chip couldn't help but feel happy for her. But it was so odd. She never liked casinos. It had something relating to husband number 2 or something. Chip suspected that this trip was probably a regular thing for Esmerelda, and now it was clear she had used Joell's money to buy herself a car. By 2022, the 2-year-old Lexus, supposedly being used for shopping, doctor's appointments, and errands, it should have had approximately 12 to 15,000 miles on it. So think 16 to 24,000 kilometers. However, the new red Lexus had 24,000 miles or 38,000 kilometers on it. Where could Esmerelda have been going? Chip had expressed concerns to Wendy and his wife Rachel about Esmerelda possibly manipulating his mother. Neither agreed and were not supporting him in this. Esmerelda's caregiving was crucial since they lived so far away and they couldn't help themselves. When Chip raised his concerns again, they asked for proof, which he did not have. It was only a gut feeling. The clincher was the safety deposit box, the same one that Chip visited with his grandmother, originally rented on July 11th, 1947. He had last met Larry at the bank with the safety deposit in September 2018, when Joell added him as an authorized signer. This box contained wills, 4 sets of divorce papers, jewelry, and family heirlooms. It had included Chip's father's gold Shriner's ring with an emerald stone, something that was passed down from generation to generation. Now, once again, Chip met gloomy Larry at the bank, and evidently his mood hadn't improved since they had left the storage unit that I told you about in the first episode. As Chip signed and used the keys, he began to inspect the box, pulling out familiar documents that once belonged in his mother's desk. So why were these here? He searched in vain for any jewelry boxes, finding none. Panic setting in, where the hell were the diamond rings that Joell wore on special occasions? What had happened to the Shriner's ring? At the bottom of the box, he found photos Joell had taken back during the renovation of the Athena condo, which he pocketed. And Larry stood there silently. Blindsided, Chip glared at Larry, the power of attorney and executor of the will. He also knew that Mo and Larry were also involved to some extent, and queasiness watched over Chip. Must he been robbed? Meeting up with everyone, Chip restrained himself from interrogating Larry as he badly wanted to. After all, he still needed the man's cooperation. This new will, quote, was completely out of my mother's character and a complete 180 from how she had previously structured her will, with several trusts established for each of her children. All the money was to stay within the family, no charitable contributions, no one-offs to a person here or there, end quote. He was frustrated about the money going to Esmerelda, but what truly angered him was the will stipulation that forbade him from contesting it. Anyone who tried would lose their share of the estate, and he couldn't risk that, especially with the costly probate process ahead. He intended to speak with Wendy, who was an attorney herself. Now Chip, his wife and daughter, visited his mother's assisted living condo to sort through what little furniture remained from the Athena, his mother's original 3-bedroom, 3-bath condo. Had the rest been donated to charity? He texted Esmerelda, but she didn't reply. Wendy texted. She still didn't reply. They asked Larry to speak with her because they wanted to know more about this donation to charity. Leaving the room, they heard Larry's muffled voice. Evidently, Esmerelda had answered his call. Returning, Larry informed them that Esmerelda couldn't talk now. Her daughter had cancer and was in the ICU. Well, Chip felt terrible sympathizing, but he also knew his and Wendy's time in town was limited, and he noted she had picked up quickly enough when Larry called. Discussing this further, Larry ended it with, quote, "If you have questions, I can pass them along to her," end quote. So now he was running interference for Esmerelda. Back at the hotel, Chip saw that Larry had emailed 2 charity receipts from emptying Mother's storage unit in January. One was from a woman's shelter in DeSoto, not far from Esmeralda's home. These items were a few pieces of furniture and some boxes. Maybe these contained some of the photo albums that Chip desperately wanted back. He called the number on the receipt, and the woman who answered did not recall this donation, and it was unlikely that any items from it remained. They operated a store selling items every week, and Fridays were 50% off. Ugh. He inquired about photo albums, and the response made him ill. Oh, they discarded the photos, keeping the albums and frames. Now he called the second charity, which was from South Dallas, and the receipt indicated a similar donation, boxes and furniture, with an estimated value of $1,500. It all looked normal until Chip noticed that the name of the organization had misspelled community, leaving off the second M. That's kind of weird, kind of sloppy. Using Google Maps, the address brought him to a boarded-up building. Moving around to the rear, nothing indicated that this was once a legitimate business. Quote, "An image that popped up was an open, heavy-looking gate leading to a door. The next building had a small loading dock in the back. He noted 2 guys handling furniture from the store to a small truck. What the heck? Is this a fencing operation?" End quote. But he could hear his wife's voice in his head, chiding him for being suspicious, so he let this go. He yet again ignored his gut warning him about Esmerelda. He was searching for missing furniture, family heirlooms, and wondered where the contents of the safety deposit box had vanished to. He called the phone number on the receipt. No answer. He emailed the organization with questions, asking them to get back to him. Continuing his research, he came across an article from a few years earlier, when the charity's president had been arrested for embezzlement. Oh, great. He found other email addresses and phone numbers associated with the charity, but never received a reply of any kind. And his mother's funeral still had to be arranged, but there was no rush as she had been cremated. Planning to go home, Chip would drive a U-Haul back to collect what remained of his mother's belongings by the end of May. As Wendy and Chip put their heads together to write their mother's obituary, one that would recite all of the material things that Joell had acquired in her glorious life, an email arrived from Larry with tips from Esmerelda on Joell Fleming's obituary. Well, jaws dropping, this wildly exaggerated the few very short-lived jobs Joell had had, and her volunteer work at a children's medical center, and her many contributions to charitable organizations. What charitable organizations? This woman did not donate to charitable organizations. Reading from the obituary, Esmerelda suggested, quote, "She enjoyed a long and sweet friendship with her good friends, Linda Cornelius and Stephanie Grimes. She was grateful and fond of her supportive business team, Mo and Larry. Joell is survived by 3 children and 3 grandchildren." End quote. Well, wait, so Mother hadn't cared enough about Chip, Wendy, and Eric and her grandchildren to name them? No, this was nonsense. The over-exaggeration of her life's achievements, that actually fit, but not naming her family was entirely out of character. Was this produced to serve as some evidence if they contested the will? And they would learn that this wasn't Esmerelda's first attempt to publish an obituary. She had done it before. You know, The police get warrants to search cell phone records for a reason. A lot can be learned from cell phone activity. And Joell Fleming had two, an old one and a new one. In March, when Chip had visited, he found the old one in its box in her desk. This wasn't currently being used. Her new one was evidently with Esmarelda. Larry explained that they were keeping track of Joell's bills, and he promised to get it from Esmarelda. Meanwhile, Chip flipped through the old phone, which held many of her accounts. Amazon and Netflix accounts were connected to email addresses that were unfamiliar. The email app had more email addresses, many variations of Esmerelda's, and other caregiver names in the ID. It also had an active LifeLock account to prevent identity theft and a credit report. He asked Larry, as the executor of the will, to provide him with this information, but he hadn't done so because it was tax season. Looking her accounts over, it seemed to be what he expected. 2 credit cards with a combination of $40,000 in credit. Then he read the bottom of the report where it went wonky. A credit card for Belk department store with a credit line of $2,000 was opened in January 2021. This card was paid on time each month, the balance $690. But Chip knew that his mother did not have store credit cards, and the woman was a fashion snob. Think the Devil Wore Prada. Belk, a mid-level retail shop? No way. And the closest Belk store was in Rockwall. And in January 2021, when the card was opened, Joell was living at the Turtle Creek apartment 30 minutes away from Rockwall. That is not close by. And she would never travel that far to buy clothes. Not that she was buying clothes anyway during the pandemic. And when Joell had originally developed writing difficulty, Chip had convinced her to have her trusted CPA, Larry, pay her bills. Calling him, he said he had never paid anything to Belk. Okay, so who had? A theory began to form. Esmerelda had opened the account at Belk in Joell's name at a store near her home, and she controlled the mail, making the minimum monthly payments to avoid collection calls and attention. But could Chip prove this, though? He called Belk, informing them that his mother had died, and he suspected that this account was fraudulent. Passing the security questions, Chip learned the address and the phone numbers were Joell's, and the Belk's account was opened in Waxahachie, about 15 minutes south of Esmerelda's. The purchases did not match what an 80-year-old woman would buy, and the clothes were way too big and included men's clothing. He thought they likely matched members of Esmerelda's family. Asking for the previous statements, the account was now frozen. He asked how the payments had been made. By electronic check, and he was given the account number. Could he open a fraud case? Well, unfortunately, there was just no evidence of fraud, and Chip was disgusted that she'd gotten away with opening a bogus card, making unauthorized purchases, all in his mother's name. He was beginning to realize that his mother's dementia had worsened to the point she had no executive function to make decisions as she had in the past. Even if Esmerelda had told Joell about the card, she hadn't been capable of giving consent. Now Chip looked into Mother's Wells Fargo account, the account where she had consolidated her other accounts into in 2017. Chip had lost access to this account when the password had been changed, and who had likely helped her to do that? Esmerelda. With the aid of the old cell phone and the email account, he was able to reset her password. He had never known exactly how much Esmerelda was being paid, but Wendy indicated in early 2019 it was around $150,000, which seemed a lot, even if overnight visits were required. Now he learned that Esmerelda was being paid roughly $300,000 a year for the previous 3 years. Flabbergasted, he couldn't justify that amount. $300,000 in caregiving services for one woman. Was Esmerelda the reincarnation of Clara Barton, the founder of the American Red Cross? When Wendy had questioned Esmerelda's salary, Larry had poo-pooed this, saying that Joell had enough money, so it was okay. Now Chip wondered if he was getting kickbacks. Quote, "No one but the family should have been making financial decisions if Mother couldn't make them for herself. But it appears that Esmerelda, with Larry's help, intentional or otherwise, took on this role to her benefit." End quote. Aghast, as Chip reviewed the Wells accounts, he saw that the method by which Esmerelda was being paid changed in September 2021. Instead of issuing checks, Larry issued electronic checks through ACH, an automated clearinghouse. Because of this switch, Chip had the last 4 numbers of Esmerelda's account, which matched the account being used to make payments to the Belk card, which supported his theory of the unauthorized card and unauthorized transactions. But if the woman was making $300,000 a year, why wouldn't she just pay off the balance? And further investigation revealed that Larry was issuing Esmerelda advances. In December 2021, $20,000. The week after Chip's January 2022 visit, Esmerelda received a $10,000 bonus and vacation pay. Esmerelda still owed $16,000 from the December advance. No wonder that Mother had been isolated from them, and he was not going to let this thing go. Now Chip really began digging. How much had this woman taken, albeit stolen, from his mother? Joell was, quote, actively dying, end quote, in early March 2022, passing away on the 8th. During these early days in March, he uncovered 3 transaction online purchases that sold loungewear and bedtime clothing for elderly women. Okay. Calling, the mailing address of these was for Esmerelda's home, but the packages were sent to Mother's assisted living apartment. Dozens of pieces of clothing were purchased, but only a couple were in his mother's size, extra small. And this package arrived the day after Joell's death. Paraphrasing now. Yes, it was possible she bought them for Mother, not knowing that she would die. But what about the others that weren't her size? When Chip and Wendy arrived at the assisted living, no packages were anywhere to be seen. He fervently believed that Esmerelda had bought the clothes for herself, with a few pieces thrown in for Mother, just in case. Now he saw 2 Sam's Club transactions on March 3rd and 4th. One made near Mother's apartment, purchased using the Wells Fargo card. The other near Esmerelda's home. Previously, Mother had used her Citi card to pay for purchases. Well, February 27th, Larry authorized himself as a signer on both her Citi accounts, which likely triggered Esmerelda to not use the Citi cards, hoping that Larry wouldn't catch the unauthorized purchases, which would be lost in the bottom of the brokerage statement. Now, logging into Joell's Sam's card, Chip did not find what he wanted. So Esmerelda was likely using her own Sam's card, paying for them with Joell's card. But how could he prove that Esmerelda made these purchases? But I'd have to ask, how could anyone prove that Joell made these purchases? And if she wasn't making them, remember she's going to die 5 days later. If she's not making them, then who was? Well, at home, out doing errands with Rachel, they randomly passed Sam's Club, and with a twinkle in her eye, Rachel suggested that they go in and ask some questions. Hey, let's give it a shot. Well, finding a part-time high school age associate, he looked into Joell's account for them, which was inactive. But they also looked into an account linked to Esmerelda's phone number, and there were transactions from the 3rd and 4th, but they didn't have the receipts. Thanking the associate, they went back to check the brokered statements. Chip now knew that Esmerelda was using his mother's money for personal gain. But then, looking at some documents, his eyes caught something else. A jewelry appraisal done in December 2020. Well, what was this? Was this what happened to the jewelry that had vanished from the bank safety deposit box? And this check was signed by Larry, and the appraiser lived close to Mo's place, one of Joel's fiduciaries. The next morning, Chip called the appraiser, who was very sympathetic, and he sent the appraisal report. Once again, Chip was gobsmacked. This wasn't about a piece of jewelry. It was about $200,000 worth of jewelry. Some had been his grandmother's, and this included Mother's diamond rings and some pieces he had never seen before. He now emailed the appraisal to his brother and sister. Eric replied first, quote, "Esmerelda sent me some jewelry back in January." End quote. Oh my. Wendy explained to Eric that he had to share this information with them. And Chip now explains that Eric is crazy book smart, but doesn't think logically about life issues like this. But now he had shared, and they realized that about $50,000 worth of jewelry was missing, including a very gaudy 3.38 carat deep blue sapphire ring, accentuated by multiple other gemstones, which alone was worth $20,500. They would ask Larry about the appraisal, but this confirmed to Chip that Esmerelda was a methodical thief. And she had probably done this to a man named Bob Barnhill, Jr. So who is this Bob Barnhill, Jr.? Well, a regular guy. He had lifelong friends and enjoyed his comfortable routine, his favorite restaurants, followed by Mass on Sunday. He relished a good political debate, enhanced by his dry sense of humor. Retiring after 35 years as a senior health, education, and finance officer, he adored his Cocker Spaniel named Pickles. In April 2011, at the age of 80, Bob passed away, and Chip found his obituary online, noting that he had no children. No family members were mentioned either, only his good friends. And he was survived by a wife and 4 stepchildren. Who was the wife? Esmerelda Gomez. Bob Barnhill had appeared in the background check they did on Esmerelda in 2019. Back in 2009, Esmerelda was Bob's power of attorney, and she had been power of attorney for another man back in 1998. She had taken Barnhill as her surname once they married. At that time, Chip had no evidence that they'd married, but now this was confirmed in his obituary. Photos of her looking cozy with Bob appear as well, and they resembled the same photos Esmerelda had taken with Joell. Could Chip prove that these photos were staged to prove her friendship with Joell? No, but his gut knew that something wasn't right. These relationships felt transactional. Really, just starting his research, what he would later uncover would continue to blow his mind. Guys, you have to remember, I'm not even telling you everything because I need 4 more episodes to do it all. You really have to read this book. I am telling you, it is such a warning for all of us. So 2 months later, they are wrapping up the dissolution of Joell's earthly possessions. The siblings return to Dallas again, with Chip's son-in-law Steve accompanying them. Arriving earlier than Wendy and Eric, Steve and Chip set out to explore Dallas a little bit. Up for it, Steve didn't ask questions when Chip put the address of the boarded-up shop that had been given Joell's furniture in the GPS. Arriving there, it looked boarded up and sketchy. It was registered with the state, and it was in good standing, but all of the phone numbers he tried were out of service. Steve asked if they were going in. Quote, "Not a chance. Nothing about this place feels right." End quote. They now drove to the other shop, a one-story building set back from the roadway. Entering, Chip and Steve strolled past rows of furniture, seeing nothing familiar. Well, it had been months since the so-called donation, but he still left feeling down. Although he loved his mother, Chip and Joelle's relationship had been strained, and in the last years, dementia had widened that gap. But he blamed Esmerelda for deliberately widening the gap. He had been suspicious, pushed it down, knowing that he needed help, and he struggled mightily, feeling guilty as the months rolled by. Even finding a lamp would have felt like a victory, but his hopes had been dashed. Even if he managed to speak to Esmerelda, he knew she'd mouth some platitudes like mother's belongings wouldn't fit in the apartment after the Athena. Truth was, quote, everything that came out of this woman's mouth was meant to manipulate and keep us from discovering her true intentions, to have mother and her money all to herself, end quote. But in mid-June, they achieved a small victory. The annuity payment to Esmerelda was frozen, and the case was redirected to an interpleader involving Joell. The family's aim was to consolidate funds in the probate court to resolve the will and the annuity in a single proceeding. As this was unfolding, Chip called Tracy, the daughter of Joelle's former Athena condo neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. Since Mrs. Johnson had once hired Esmerelda, Chip wanted to know how it came about and if she had had any issues with her. After finding her number, he left Tracy a message, and she called back within the hour. She was open about the situation. Her mother had had dementia and needed around-the-clock care. Tracy had interviewed the agency that Esmerelda worked for and felt confident in their hiring practices. To ensure her mother's safety, she visited daily at different times. She secured valuables in a safe and installed cameras for monitoring when she wasn't there. And for the most part, Esmerelda did what was required of her. However, there was one incident that made Tracy's hair stand on end. They had run out of, paper towels or toilet paper, but something essential, and her mother's credit card was on the counter. Esmerelda reached for it, offering to go to the store, but Tracy took the card from her instead. Something about the situation didn't feel right. Esmerelda had told Joell that she left caring for Tracy's mother because the mother was going to live in an assisted living facility. Tracy explained that that was not true. She had, quote, decided to go in a different direction with my mother's care, end quote. And Chip understood immediately. He realized Esmerelda wasn't seeking a new client when she snuck bagels to Joell that fateful day. She was looking for a new mark. Tracy was far too closely monitoring the situation, giving Esmerelda no wiggle room to rob her blind. And Chip and his family, they had not monitored this closely due to logistics and distance. And it just hadn't occurred to them. They hadn't known what they didn't know and blindly followed Mother's trust in Esmerelda. After speaking 45 minutes, Chip thanked Tracy for her insights, and he felt vindicated. Tracy hadn't trusted Esmerelda either, which was another small victory that affirmed his suspicions. However, his renewed sense of purpose began to waver by July, when Esmerelda died. Chip just couldn't believe it. He needed her to be alive because so many questions remained unanswered. The annuity payment was on hold, and suspicions of elder abuse and fraud were surfacing. And he couldn't help but wonder, was she really dead? Had she faked her death? Well, after all, truth is stranger than fiction. Esmerelda's probate attorney was Abby Thomas, who had originally been hired by Larry to handle Joelle's will. It was a mystery how Larry had found Abby Thomas in the first place. And later, communication revealed it was Abby Thomas who had misspelled Joell Fleming's name. And this was not encouraging, considering that the only people who misspelled it were Joell, her family, and Dr. Quack. Yeah, remember him? Chip began to suspect that all of these individuals might be in cahoots. Now he spoke with Mitch, the attorney Chip had hired to navigate the complex legal procedures he was involved with, and he asked him whether Abby Thomas probating Joell and Esmerelda's estates presented a conflict of interest. Well, this was a valid concern, but Mitch pointed out that working with a single party did simplify an otherwise complicated situation. Well, frustrated, Chip could only brace himself. A discovery hearing was scheduled, but he wasn't confident Mitch fully understood the extent of Esmerelda's manipulations. Evelyn, Rachel, and his daughter Kelsey were hesitant to believe that Esmerelda was involved in some criminal conspiracy, but Chip was convinced, and he felt very isolated in his understanding. He devised a plan: gather answers, reclaim their inheritance, and ensure that their mother's true intentions were honored. Additionally, he needed to find out whether Esmerelda was truly dead. There is a website in Texas that provides death certificates, so Chip submitted a request to see if one had been filed for her. Gathering the results would take approximately a week. Next, he turned to Facebook and found an account for Esmerelda with only a few posts over the past few months. But in contrast, her daughter Holly, who had occasionally acted as a substitute caregiver, was much more active on Facebook during the 2021-2022 years. And yet Holly made no mention of her mother's passing. On her sister Mia's page, there was a cryptic post that read, "Thinking of you," which was linked to Esmerelda's page. Chip thought that there would likely be something more significant, more substantial if a parent had passed away. He also wondered if he was becoming one of those crazy conspiracy theorists. As he debated whether to continue his research or just let probate handle everything, Wendy called him with an unusual idea. "Have you ever heard of an Akashic Records reader?" No, he hadn't, nor had I. Wendy explained that a friend of hers consulted one occasionally. It involved a spiritual exploration of one's life, as every person leaves behind some cosmic impression. And it was definitely outside the box. But maybe she could provide some context for what had happened. And Wendy assured him that the reader had a reliable reputation and her price was reasonable. And Chip figured, what could it hurt at this point? So Wendy met with Sue, the Akashic reader, and then filled Chip in. She had described a house by a lake where two older men joined Esmerelda and Joell. The men buried Esmerelda in sand up to her neck, and then they went into the house and brought out jewelry, coins, furniture, and a bunch of lamps. Well, wait, had Wendy mentioned that these were the items that they were looking for? No, she had not, and these did align with Mother's missing items. Well, Chip was the first to admit that this was unusual, and that the Akashic reader had accurately described the furniture that had gone missing. Well, maybe he should give it a try too. So Chip made an appointment with Sue, preparing a list of questions that would not reveal his true desires. The first thing Sue mentioned was that Joell was presenting herself as a 40-year-old woman. And this made Chip laugh out loud. That is so true. She would definitely do that. Well, they then moved on to Esmerelda. Was she alive? Did she have a history of taking advantage of the elderly? Sue confirmed that Esmerelda had indeed taken advantage of others before. But this was the first time she'd involved her 3 or 4 daughters in her schemes. Sue described a storage unit located out in the boonies, about 5 or 8 kilometers down a road leading to a split at a lake. Chip felt a chill. That described the road Larry lived on. Sue also detailed the storage unit, describing it as a parking lot with multiple levels. It was dark red or orange with some stars on it, and they had been using it for 5 or 7 years. And she saw the numbers 3117 or 317. Pulling up Google Maps, Chip confirmed the existence of a storage unit near the split in the lake. Sue said that Esmerelda's gang was in possession of Joell's belongings. Among the items were a Victorian-styled couch, a dark brown couch, and a filing cabinet, all of which matched the furniture in Joell's Athena condo. Sue said Esmerelda never wanted to work and was jealous of Joell, wishing to live the same lifestyle. She had kept some pearls, several rings, and specifically a masculine ring that sounded a lot like Chip's grandfather's ring, the Shriner's ring. Their 90-minute conversation ended with her advising him to reach out again if he had any other questions. Well, being honest, Chip wasn't certain about what to think, but with no leads to follow, he decided to search for that storage unit. Using Google Maps Street View, he focused on East Dallas, which had several storage facilities. One was located on the outskirts of Garland, town surrounded by industrial buildings and strip malls. As he virtually drove through the area, he noticed that this facility was only one story. Continuing his virtual exploration, he came across an older strip mall at the address 317. Aha! Across the street was a motorcycle business called 5 Star Motorcycles. And he couldn't help but be amazed. Every clue that Sue had shared with him seemed to line up perfectly, except the height of the storage facility. But he suspected that this might be the one Sue referred to. But did he share this discovery with anyone? No, he feared they would think he was some kind of nut. But how could he prove this was real? He gathered addresses for Esmerelda and her family, noting their frequent moves, including 2 in Garland. Holly lived closest to the public storage facility he was tracking, and he decided to ask Mitch to include storage facilities in the discovery request to help recover his mother's possessions. It was a long shot, but he had nothing to lose, and Mitch rewarded the paperwork for a wider scope and filed. Now they had 30 days to respond. Their response came in 2 parts, one in late September 2022 and the other in October. The documents were a chaotic mix of bank statements, emails, timesheets, and medical bills. Attorney Abby Thomas told Mitch that there were references to Adult Protective Services in the second patch, prompting Chip to question why on earth had they been involved. Well, Mitch had no idea, but he requested the records from the courts. With frightening scenarios and questions rolling through his mind over why Adult Protective Services were looking into his mother, he knew the wait for this documentation would be maddening. A goal-oriented guy, Chip updated the plan. Identify any obvious signs of documentation of crime or elder abuse. And second, create a timeline of Esmerelda's entire history with Joell Fleming. He and his siblings had lost track of events after the medical power of attorney was revoked in August 2019, and it was crucial to account for these missing years. When Chip wasn't working, he reviewed every document he could find: medical records, bank statements, emails, and more. Larry left notes punctuated everywhere, maybe like he was anticipating a lawsuit. Chip learned that Esmerelda mischaracterized the children of Joell Fleming, portraying them to Larry as unfriendly and neglectful of their mother. And this was particularly hurtful, as they were already feeling guilty about living far away from her. Esmerelda had effectively placed herself between Joell and her children, deliberately making communication difficult, especially after the new will was drafted in January 2020. And Larry's responses to Esmerelda were equally concerning. He didn't just go along with her to keep the peace. He appeared to believe everything she told him. For instance, after Chip's last visit to her in January 2022, Esmerelda claimed that he had showed up unannounced, and I wouldn't blame him if he had, because he had called several times and his calls were never answered. She accused him of ignoring Joell during the visit and searching her drawers, completely distorting the nature of the visit. Had Esmerelda been monitoring all of Joell's communications? Well, yes, we know she was. And Chip had gone through his mother's jewelry boxes, talking to Wendy on video phone during that visit. So the filling caretaker had told this to Esmerelda, well, evidently. And Chip now saw it. He, quote, understood exactly what she was doing. She had planted a seed. She wanted Larry to think we were only after Mother's money, that we didn't care about her health or welfare, which was ridiculous. We cared, but we had been frozen out, plain and simple, unquote. Chip learned that medical tests for dementia were conducted in 2018 and 2019, during the time when Chip and Wendy still held the medical power of attorney. Esmerelda had accompanied Joell for these tests, but had never shared the results with them, leaving them in the dark. Chip now believed that Esmerelda had convinced Joell not to share this information with her children in order to take advantage of the situation. Chip also learned that Joell had fallen several times, resulting in visits to the emergency room, once with a fractured arm. On another occasion, Joell had feared she was having a heart attack. And of all this, Chip only knew that their mother had tripped after the flood in the Athena condo, which had warped the floor. He learned that Joell had been undergoing physical therapy, with the therapist sharing details and at-home exercise suggestions with Esmerelda, even though Esmerelda lacked the medical power of attorney, and Joell hadn't signed a release for her medical information. Wendy, an attorney herself, confirmed that these were two HIPAA violations, unauthorized sharing and the transmission of unsecured information via Yahoo. Chip now wondered if this could allow them to access Esmerelda's Yahoo account and planned to ask Mitch. And while studying the documentation from November 2022, Chip noticed a troubling pattern. Spending. And this was not replacing Mother's necessaries or socks. These expenses were not typical for an affluent 80-year-old woman, and the bank had not flagged the unusual activity. Esmerelda was on a spending spree. Joell's Neiman Marcus card had been dormant since mid-2019, but her two Citi cards accounted for 90% of the spending. Back in March 2022, Chip asked Larry for access to his mother's accounts, but had been ignored. He requested access again in late summer, only to be dismissed once more, and Chip felt that Larry was simply being an uncooperative jerk. Chip now began recording all expenditures in a spreadsheet with categories such as groceries and household items so that he could use filters once the database was complete, hoping to aid their legal case. After reviewing her credit report, he noted some activity on her Nordstrom's card that was missing from the discovery documents. By accessing this account, he obtained his mother's purchase history. There were purchases for children's clothing, which was strange since Joell's grandchildren were grown. There were purchases for plus-size women's clothing, but Joell wore size 2. This indicated unauthorized spending by Esmerelda, and he added it to the spreadsheet. Without a doubt, Chip now knew that Esmerelda had obtained control of the credit cards in 2018. Joell's total purchases that year had been about $7,000, which wasn't too concerning. But in 2019, brace yourself, this figure skyrocketed to $53,000, and in 2020 reached an astonishing $80,000. So in 2026 dollars, that's $69,000 and $103,000 respectively. And in 2021, the spending dropped to just $60,000, which is $74,000 today. That is a grotesque amount of money. Esmerelda was spending between $500 and $1,500 a month for food for petite Joell, who, remember, weighed 90 pounds. And restaurant expenditures alone increased by 50%. despite Joell living in an assisted living unit that included 3 meals a day. The grocery bill exceeded $1,000 in 7 of 9 months. In those final 3 months of Joell's life, it soared to $2,500. Who could possibly eat that much? As I've said, Joell Fleming was quite the snob. When she did shop, she did so exclusively at high-end department stores or boutiques. Shop at Target, Walmart? Never. But evidently, now she made purchases at places like Target's and Marshall's every 7 to 10 days, and each transaction ranged from $300 to $600. Not on your life. These are not her purchases. And how did the bank not find this suspicious? In Joell's inbox, there were a few emails that declined certain charges, but not nearly enough. All of this spending, and neither Chip nor Wendy noticed anything new at their mother's residences. In fact, as she moved from the Athena condo to Turtle Creek and then to assisted living, her belongings seemed to vanish. Additionally, Esmerelda was spending over $150 a month at Office Depot. Office Depot, like what is she spending money on? When Chip visited the store, he entered Esmerelda's reward point number and email, pulling up her purchase history. In June 2021, there was a $165 charge for typeset pages with a revision fee, along with purchases of pens, books, and 5 garage sale signs. Oh my God, garage sale signs. Chip's eyebrows shot through the ceiling. He found an email from Esmerelda to Larry saying that she had moved Joell into the assisted living unit. Her daughters had moved Joell's belongings to the storage unit and given some items to charity. Okay. However, when Larry took Chip to the storage unit, we know it was nearly empty. Now Chip began to search for online garage sales in Esmerelda's hometown. But he found that the towns required registration to access his information, and he could not view past garage sales. But he discovered how to file a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. Chip promptly submitted the request for all the garage sales from June to August in 2021 and 2022 using Esmerelda's address in DeSoto, a town south of Dallas. While waiting for the information to come back, he kept accessing receipts from past purchases at various stores, a challenging task due to the security features. He noted 2 significant charges for meals at upscale restaurants on December 14, 2021, and on January 29, 2022. Joell had hardly been eating in those last months, so who was enjoying these meals? Each charge was around $156. After emailing the restaurants, Chip managed to obtain the receipt from December. It included 2 $30 meals and 4 glasses of wine. But then it hit him. December 14th, 2021 was the day Joell Fleming went on hospice care. And then again, January 29th, 2022, that was when Chip departed after his final visit to his mother. Were they celebrating that Esmerelda was close to receiving the annuity? Well, had there been other celebrations? Yes, he noted other restaurant expenditures on Joell's charge cards. For example, on September 19th, 2019, there was a charge of $142. The day of the flood. Well, did they go out to eat because they couldn't cook at home? That's possible. There were other restaurant charges, though, that exceeded what would be considered a reasonable amount for meals that Joell Fleming might enjoy. And then the FOIA request email appeared. Scanning, his mother had moved into assisted living mid-June 2021. Esmerelda held 2 garage sales the 2nd and 3rd weekends of June, and she organized additional sales in August and November. Joell had passed away in early March 2022. Larry had her remaining property moved to the storage unit in April, and Esmerelda held 2 garage sales in mid-April as well. All right, so I have to ask you, how many garage sales do you have every year? That many? Finally, after Wendy and Chip had loaded up their U-Haul in late May, Esmeralda had another garage sale in June, and each sale was preceded by a charitable donation receipt that listed items such as a box of shoes, a table and chairs, and included a thank you note. And I conclude that she skimmed off these items to sell. Cross-referencing dates, emails, and receipts made a lot easier by the spreadsheet, Chip began to realize the extent to which his mother's belongings had been depleted. He read that Larry emailed Esmeralda to confirm that her possessions could be donated, since Joelle's children did not want to pay for the furniture's shipping costs. As Chip delved further, he discovered photographs of the U-Haul truck and Esmeralda's friend's truck that contained 120 boxes. Delivered to multiple charities, a check was written to her friend for the completed assistance. Now Chip referred to these charity receipts. He found no mention of significant items such as the bed, TV, coffee table, or china cabinet. All were missing. And it was clear that these boxes likely contained the cherished items like photo albums, family heirlooms, college yearbooks, childhood photos, slides, 8mm films of kids growing up, all now lost. Then it hit him. Esmeralda was planning to live like his mother. She bought clothes, she took the jewelry she liked, and she was furnishing her home with the legacy furniture that belonged to Joell. He learned that she had rented a U-Haul in West Dallas and returned it to Corsiana, Texas, about 45 minutes south of downtown Dallas. Well, why? What was in Corsiana? And how had they managed to drive 460 miles when this trip should have been under 100 miles? And where had they gone? Well, he shared this with Rachel and Wendy, who still remained skeptical. But why would Esmeralda go to all this trouble to donate items to a charity? It didn't make any sense. 460 miles to donate items to charity? You can do that in town. Chip now sought more proof for the doubters, visiting U-Haul. Greeted by a nice, gullible young man, the employee eagerly assisted, and the printer whirred to life, printing revealing dates, times, and addresses. Back home, Chip used Google Maps again, this time to trace the U-Haul drop-off location in Corsicana, only to find that it was a small restaurant in the middle of nowhere. There was a U-Haul parking lot, but no store in sight. Zooming out, he found 4 U-Haul locations that Esmeralda and her crew must have passed, heading to this parking lot with no shop. Well, how did they even know about this place, and what were they doing there? And then he noted a major highway ran from Corsicana to Houston. Could she be moving there? Was that part of the unexplained 460 miles? Google Maps confirmed it was likely. Burnt out from analyzing financial expenditures, Chip set these documents aside and glanced at the stack of yet untouched papers. As he dug through them, he noticed that Esmeralda had purchased Joelle's 2001 Lexus for $2,000, which was about half of its actual value. Well, he had thought the car had been traded in to buy a new red Lexus. Well, annoyed, Chip decided to call a man from whom he'd recently purchased a Honda. He asked him to run a Carfax report giving him the VIN number, and 20 minutes later, an email arrived from the dealer. Since the car was registered out of state, the name was not included. But this car was purchased in December 2019. It was also involved in an accident on May 25th, 2020, causing moderate front-end damage. And he laughed first at karma, And second, that she might be a thief, but she was cheap. There's no way she was going to pay to have this fixed. Searching accidents, he found one in Grand Prairie, 20 miles away from Esmerelda's house. The daughter, Mia, had hit a guardrail. Ticketed, Mia had received a $360 fine, which remained unpaid by August 2020 because she hadn't shown up in court. Further investigating in Dallas County revealed multiple arrests for unauthorized vehicle use. And it was obvious. Mia was a car thief. Charming. With this new information, Chip started trying to piece it all together. But one thing that still puzzled him was the September 2019 flood at the Athena condo. Joell had mentioned back in 2018 that the toilets were backing up due to the building aging, but she had still refused to move. Now, reviewing repair documentation and the photos from the safety deposit box, he realized that a single flush could not have caused damage to multiple rooms, floors, and walls. The damage must have resulted from multiple flushes. But why would someone do that? Now Chip contacted the longtime maintenance man at the Athena to request copies of the maintenance report. Well, yes, he could have them, but they were archived off-site, and he did offer to retrieve them. Chip also asked whether other condos had experienced the same plumbing issue, learning they had not. Something unusual had been found in the pipe, though the maintenance guy couldn't recall the details. Well, now Chip spoke to a plumber that he golfed with, who told him that a simple stopper could plug up a toilet, and they were sold at Lowe's or Home Depot. Thinking all this through, Chip thought that Esmerelda wanted to further isolate Joell, and a plumbing mishap would do the trick and displace her from her comfort zone at the Athena, moving her away from any acquaintances she had there. But this is complete conjecture. What had actually happened? Now, I want to take a moment to emphasize, never underestimate Chip E. Wallace. I am genuinely impressed by the intensity and perseverance that he demonstrates as he's meticulously examining every detail, flipping over stones to sift through the mountain of documentation and conducting thorough internet searches to ferret out the truth about what happened. His focus is unwavering, borderline obsessive, as he works to unveil the reality behind the situation. His mother was secretive and selfish and challenging, but he loved her. And what is unfolding here is truly appalling. And again, I am skipping over many layers of his extensive digging and research, as there are countless discoveries that contribute to this complex story. Although it's unsettling, it ultimately highlights his determination to reveal the hard truth. This realization shocked him and his siblings as they came to understand the lengths that some individuals would go to and the greed and cruelty humanity is capable of. After not receiving any updates, Chip called the manager of the Athena again, and he was told that the archived information could not be found, but he did remember the unusual thing that had been stuffed down the pipe. It was an adult diaper, along with a piece of metal like a coat hanger. And Chip thought to himself, quote, "Well, I'll be damned, I was partly right," end quote. This clearly seems deliberate, stuffing a diaper down a pipe with a coat hanger. But who would benefit from it? Well, the flood had forced Joell to move from her cherished condo after 25 years, a condo that had belonged to her parents. Chip found a letter dated April 2019, addressed to Larry and signed by Joell, stating that she did not want to move out. So what had changed? This context is crucial. So 6 weeks before the flood, Wendy and Chip had been abruptly removed from Joell's medical power of attorney. Displeased with this development, both Chip and Wendy assumed that Joell's broker, who had been with her for over 25 years, would keep a watchful eye on her affairs, and how mistaken they were. And this wraps up part 2 of the Caregiver's Game, Unraveling Financial Deceit in the Shadows of Dementia by Charles E. Wallace, Jr. We have learned a lot, but there are many, many questions. And in part 3, Chip will continue to connect the dots, peeling back the layers of the onion until his questions are answered, with the probate court ahead. What will happen to the annuity and the estate? Will Esmerelda's estate walk away with $500,000? What can we all learn from this betrayal of a vulnerable woman's trust? Thank you for listening, Murder Bookies. And your input is invaluable. I cannot do this without you. I see you as you hear me. Please take a moment to leave a positive 5-star review to help me attract new listeners. You can contact me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com and find me on X, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And consider joining my Patreon for $2 a month, $4 a month if you really love me, at www.patreon.com/MurderShelfBookClub. Trust your gut just like Chip Wallace does. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.